that died in the vehicle, forgotten, it seems, by the dad, who is a police officer in Rome, Mark Fanfarillo. Yesterday, the DA's office announced there will not be charges filed. And on the line right now is Scott McNamara. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Bill. How are you today?
Good. I mean, I heard yesterday people saying, well, of course, he's a police officer, special privilege that the charges won't be filed. But this really is manslaughter. And if you could define that for people, there's nothing special about this at all. This was just a horrific story. And explain manslaughter to us.
Sure. In New York State, manslaughter, we looked at this as a manslaughter in the second degree. Manslaughter in our state is when a person, when there is a risk of, serious, whatever the crime is, in this case, a risk of death, and the person knows there's a risk and disregards that risk. And in this case, we looked at, obviously, because he's a police officer, he knows that there's a risk that someone would die if you leave him in the car, a baby would die. So because he was a police officer, we didn't think we had a problem at all proving that he would know that there's a risk.
Yeah.
The issue then becomes, did he engage in conduct that just totally disregarded the risk? And, obviously on its surface he did, but in court, we have to prove that he disregarded the risk, and forgetting to do something doesn't rise to that level. And that happens all the time. For example, a parent stops at a stop sign. They don't look both ways. They forget to look to the right.
Yeah.
They pull out, and their car gets hit by a truck, and the child gets killed. We don't prosecute that as a manslaughter because they forgot. So what we did in this case is, we looked at what he did that day. We looked at, what all the facts could prove, and some interesting things that happened that day. He was responsible that day for taking both of his children to daycare. He took his oldest child to daycare in Whitesboro. He dropped that son off. When he dropped that son off, he actually took Michael out of the car. Michael was sleeping. He was in the car seat, and the car seat now are both carriers and car seats. He takes him out of the car. He takes him in with him. He doesn't leave Michael in the car at that point. And Michael was sleeping. So he takes him in. He drops off his oldest son, and he comes back out. He puts Michael back in the car seat, and then he's supposed to, he drives to Rome. He's supposed to drive to the daycare center in Rome. And someplace between Whitesboro and Rome, he forgets that he's supposed to drop Michael off.
Yeah.
And he forgets that Michael's in the car. And I know I've seen a lot of the comments, I would never forget my child, I would never do that.
Right.
And we actually did some research on it, and I actually, in my press release, included an article that was in the Washington Post magazine, which really goes into detail on this and talks about the science behind how do people forget their babies in a car. And it appears that's what happened here. He forgot. And so it would be a lot different. Like, say, for example, had he been responsible for watching the baby all day, we would have looked at this a lot different. But he wasn't supposed to have the baby. He was supposed to drop the baby off at daycare, and that's what he forgot about.
Yeah.
And when we went back and we actually looked at different things to try to determine, obviously we look at this from the standpoint, first of all, is there a reason he forgot? So the first thing we did was we asked for his blood.
Right.
And we didn't have probable cause to get his blood because all the cops that interacted with him, I was on the phone with the lead investigator, and I said, talk to all the police. Is there anything that indicates that he's, been drinking, that he's high on drugs, marijuana, or anything like that? And they're all coming back saying nothing. And so then I said, well, we don't have probable cause to get a warrant. Ask him if we can have his blood. And he consented. He said, yeah, take my blood. So we actually we took him to the hospital, and we took a blood sample from him. We then took his phone and his computer, thinking maybe he was doing things on his cell phone or computer that distracted him, and there was nothing. So, we kind of looked at those things. And then the other thing that I considered, and I think very strongly, was we looked at, has he ever left the baby in the car before?
Right.
And even his actions that day show he didn't leave his baby in the car. He took the baby in at the other daycare center, which, and I'm not saying it's right, but I'm sure certain parents who would leave a sleeping baby in the car to run to another daycare center
right.
seconds and come back out. He didn't do that. Then we looked to see if there was any prior reports of any type of abuse or neglect by him towards either one of his children. There was nothing. Then we actually checked with his employer and said, has there ever been any complaints of any type of neglect or abuse towards any children?
Yeah.
And there was none. So, we did a really thorough investigation, and, and the bottom line is we come to this. He forgot.
Right.
And when we did the research, and actually I contacted my neighbor to the east, the DA, Jeff Carpenter, who had a case like this I think it was 2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And he provided us with all the research he had done on his case, and he did the same thing that I did. He declined prosecution.
Yeah.
For the same reason. And,
it would be much, obviously, if the person was under the influence of alcohol or drugs, if you're texting and you get into an accident, that could be considered but this is completely different from that. There's no wrongdoing. There's you're saying this is forgetting, which is much different.
Much different, and when you look at the reasons why people forget, back when you and I were young, our parents didn't forget us in a car, and the reason why is we weren't in car seats.
Right,
right. And, a lot of times our parents held us. But what has happened, and if you look at how this has transpired over the course of time, there really wasn't very many of these cases before 1990. Then in the mid-'90s, we started passing laws to make it safer for children during car accidents, that they would survive the car accident. So we required parents to put children in car seats. Then we required the car seat not to be in the front; it had to be in the back. And then we required that the car seat be turned around. Well, all of these acts, although making it safer for children in a car accident, they also contribute significantly to people forgetting because they don't see the child.
Right,
when my son was young, he was in a car seat right next to me in the front. It would be very hard to forget him because I can see him.
Right.
But now with these car seats turned around and, in the back seat where you don't see the child, that's a contributing factor. And also, change of routine is one of the things that they say contributes significantly. So we looked at this case. We actually went to the daycare provider that Michael went to try to figure out, was there a change of routine? And in this case, Michael went to that daycare facility 22 times. I mean, he was a baby. He was just born, and he was 4 months old. So the vast majority of his life, his mom stayed home with him. And then when she returned to work, he went to daycare. Well, he only went to daycare 22 times. Of those 22 times, only 3 times did his father take him.
Got it.
So this is really a change of routine. The father, was thinking about doing other things on that day. None of them bad. Actually, one of them, it was a household chore, shampooing the rugs. And then the other thing in this case is the father worked a night shift, so he typically slept during the day. That's why he didn't have the baby. That's why the baby went to daycare.
Right.
So he would drop the baby off because he would sleep all day, and because he worked at night. So, and that's exactly what happened.
I have a few listeners that have some questions on it. This one, is there any Larry? Is there any truth to the fact that he knew that the child was in the car and didn't want to wake him to bring him in the house? He was just going to wait a few minutes and allow the child to sleep, and then forgot. Is that true?
No, and actually we looked at that because that was something that was reported to us. I don't remember who reported it to us, but that was something, and we looked into that, which that doesn't make sense for 2 reasons. Number one, Mark Fanfarillo cooperated with us 100%. I mean, he never asked for a lawyer. He was interviewed numerous times, I think 6. And that was one thing we actually went back and re-interviewed him about. And that's he denies that. There's nothing to suggest that, and it also doesn't fit the fact pattern. He wasn't supposed to have the baby. He was supposed to drop the baby off at daycare. So so that part of it doesn't even make sense. It would make more sense if he was responsible for watching the child all day. If he was supposed to watch the child all day, then that would seem to be something that you could say, okay, maybe that happened. But in this case, the baby should have been at the daycare center down in Rome, he wasn't even supposed to have the baby. So we looked at that really hard, and there was nothing to suggest, that's true. And, and obviously he denies that, and it would make sense because, like you said, I wasn't even supposed to have the baby. I was supposed to drop the baby off at daycare.
Scott, as a parent, I think back on my own time with my children when they were younger, and I just can't. I think sometimes we get lucky. I hate to say it that way.
The most true statement I've ever heard.
Yeah.
When we all think back, how lucky are we? And you know what happens, and it's hard. And there's two things that go on here. We get lucky, and especially when you're a person that has a busy job or a job that there's a lot of stress on, which obviously a police officer is one of those jobs. We a lot of times, and if people think about it, we all do it. We go into autopilot. How many times have people driven to work and say, I don't even remember driving?
Yep.
You kind of go into autopilot. Your mind's someplace else because you're thinking about what you need to do that day. Your mind's racing about other things. And we've all done it. I mean, how many people have went to the grocery store and bought groceries and left the groceries at the grocery store, or like I've done numerous times, leave them in the car after you went and bought them. Right. We just you get thinking about different things you have to do, and and so that part of it, and and the other part is, and I found this interesting when I was doing the research. A lot of people want to hate him before what he did. Yeah. And there's a lot of research that suggests the reason why people do that is this. Because if you can villainize that activity, if you can villainize what happened, it can separate you from that activity. So if you can convince yourself that would never happen to me, this person's a terrible person, and hence I hate him, and he should, and he should go to jail, and he should rot, that kind of separates you from that behavior. But the reality is, it could happen to anybody. Yeah. And I highly recommend anybody that thinks this is a wrong decision, read the Washington Post article, because they actually look at some cases where prosecutors actually sought a murder charge. And, and the jury acquitted the person rather quickly. And it also shows the trauma that the parents go through. And there's no doubt. I mean, I know what his reaction was afterwards because of the 911 calls and the tapes and the interviews. He was being interviewed within, an hour of finding out that he had left his baby in the car. And this was not his action's very consistent with somebody that forgot something and made a mistake that he's going to have to live with for the rest of his life. And
I can't even imagine how he feels right now. I can't imagine it.
Neither can I. And I can tell you that he's, from what I know, he's very upset about it. And, and I know that the car in question, they didn't want the car back. There's a lot of things that you would typically, see in somebody that, when you see it in other ways, when there's an accident or something like that. All right. So, we looked at it hard, I know because he's a police officer, but honestly, I would have made this decision no matter what he did. Being a police officer, obviously there's stress that goes with that job. There was a change of routine, and he sleeps at night. Those are all contributing factors, but that doesn't make him criminally culpable. Right. We still would have to show that he knew there was a risk, which I don't have a problem. Yeah. I'm sure if you ask him right now, leaving a baby in the car, is that a risk? He would say yes. He would have said it yes before. Right. But did he do it intentionally? Right. And that's where the problem lies. If you don't do it knowingly, the only cases that we could find where there was where there was a conviction was when the person left the baby in the car intentionally. And that's why with I think you said your listener Larry's question was, did he leave the baby in the car? If he had left that baby in the car because it was sleeping and then forgot, then
that would have been a conscious decision. All right.
Then he would have knowingly left the child in the car.
Got it. All right, DA Scott McNamara, thanks so much for your time. Terrible story. You hate to even have to talk about it, but we appreciate you and the explanation this morning. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay. And I know, Mario, you wanted to talk to the DA, and I'm out of time, and I kind of, by what it says here, you have some negatives. I invite you.
Negative thing you just say about this DA.
Let's get you.
I'll call you first thing in the morning. We can talk about Scott McNamara's ethics problems and the court being investigator. The AG coming in to investigate what went on down in the city of Utica court.
We'll give you
lying on the Ferguson trial where he said he didn't know there was a gag order in your.
I'm out of time. We'll give you the chance to talk tomorrow. I'm definitely out of time. I can't wait for tomorrow morning. WIBX Utica Rome. It is 9 o'clock.